Hello, everyone. Welcome back to New Books Network. I'm Mr. Longcomer, the host of this channel. And today I'm here again with Dr. Pankaj Jain to talk about his second book. This is a continuation of the first podcast that we had together with his first book. Now, today we are talking about his second book, and the second book is titled Science and Social Religious Revolution in India. And I think this is also another fascinating book because it moves from the environment studies, the environmental aspect of Dharma to the very scientific aspect of it. So I think the shift itself is something which is very interesting, and also at the same time, the very ethnographic aspect of the work makes it valuable in that sense. So let's just go and dig into the contents of the book itself and try to see what is there in the book itself. And I'm sure the listeners will be very interested and also learn a lot from this discussion itself. So let me go straight to the author himself. And I know that Dr. Pankaj Jain have introduced himself previously, but I think for the listeners who are chipping in now, can you give a brief, short introduction about yourself? Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to discuss my second book. We already discussed my first book a few weeks back. Okay, my name is Pankaj Jain. I'm the head of the Department of Humanities and Languages at Flame University in Pune, India. I'm also the chair of the India Center, also at Flame University, Pune. Before here, I was in the US for over a decade in Dallas area, and my PhD is from Iowa and master's from Columbia, all in the US. My specialty is Indian cultural traditions and their environmental ethics, environmental issues in India, and all of those are part of my research. I also work on Indian films and Indian classical music and a little bit of course, Jain studies and India studies also, Indology also. But my most favorite or most preferred topic is again these days environmental issues of India, climate change, and so on. So we already discussed my first book in our first earlier conversation, Dharma and Ecology of Hindu Communities, Sustenance and Sustainability. In that book, we discussed the three major communities of Western central part of India, the Swadhyaya community, the Swadhyaya Parivar, the Bishnoi community, and the Bhil tribal communities in the border regions of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat. For my second book, I applied for Fulbright Fellowship that is given by the Department of State, one of the most prestigious fellowships in the fields of humanities and social sciences. I was very fortunate, privileged to receive that funding, that grant in 2012. And so in June 2012, I found myself suddenly transported from Texas to Uttarakhand, to Dehradun, and almost every district of Uttarakhand. I traveled across Uttarakhand. I went to Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, and all of those trips were part of my research. My research partner was an NGO called Hesco, Himalayan Environmental Studies and Conservation Organization, HESCO. So Hesco and Hesco's staff, Hesco's director, founder, Dr. Anil Joshi, they hosted me in Dehradun, where they have a large ashram there on the outskirts of Dehradun. Dehradun is the capital of Uttarakhand, the Himalayan state of India. And with the colleagues of Hesco, with my friends of Hesco, we traveled across Uttarakhand. They showed me in various districts of Uttarakhand what all they've been doing for decades and decades. So that is the fourth major community that I looked at after the three communities that I covered in my first book. And in addition to Hesco, I also went to Punjab for the same book, for the research for the same book. And in Punjab, I found myself at the place where Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, where he attained his enlightenment, is a place called Sultanpur. And at Sultanpur, there is a river that's called as Kali Bain. So that was the river where he found his enlightenment, but that river was extremely polluted. And how a Sikh Guru, a contemporary Sikh Guru, Baba Sichewal, how he and his followers cleaned up the entire river is the story of the second community that I cover in my second book. So 3 communities in the first book, 2 communities in the second book, and that is the brief summary of my bio a little bit and also the summary of the second book.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting in that sense. when you talk about the second book, it's like it's not only a shift from a geographical shift from one part of India to another part of India, but also it's a shift of topic, right? So,
Mhm.
how was your journey in that sense of you work on environment, now you're working on science and religion. So, what got you interested there? And I'm sure you mentioned about the fellowship that was there. So, what was your journey in that sense of shifting from one
Mhm.
area of study to another area of study, and also one part of the country to the another part of the
Right,
same
right.
country? Yeah, yeah.
It's always a great joy to, keep discovering India. We are all, especially you and me, are born in India, but, we have, at least I had not been to Uttarakhand ever before I received this fellowship. So it was a sheer pleasure, sheer blessing to be able to visit all these famous places, pilgrimage places, tourist places, Masuri, Rishikesh, Dehradun, and Almora, Nainital, and then of course pilgrimage places, Badrinath, Kedarnath, that we all hear these names a lot. But I was born in Rajasthan, the desert state of India, where there is desert, and I had never even I had not yet seen these great rivers, great pilgrimage places, Ganga, Yamuna, and all that. So it was a great blessing to be able to travel across Uttarakhand, across Himalayas. And so it was not just for research, but also a kind of a personal fulfillment that I took in these various trips. And it was, you know, lifetime memory. And I have still friendship with my friends at Hesco in Uttarakhand and in Punjab. Now, coming to the topic of the research itself, I did not plan that I will be, focusing on science and religion and science, but my focus was simply environmental issues. And I knew that Hesco is kind of a distant child of the Chipko movement. Chipko movement is extremely the most famous movement, the most famous environmental movement from India that happened in 1970s, and led by Sundarlal Bahuguna, Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Vandana Shiva, all of these big names. They and their Himalayan partners and friends in Garhwal, they succeeded in saving thousands of large indigenous trees in the Himalayas because of the efforts by Chipko movement. Chipko simply means to hug, right? To hugging. The word Chipko simply means to hug, right? So as all of these people and leaders were trying to save these trees in the Himalayan regions, they literally hugged these indigenous trees in the Himalayas, and that's how they could convince the government, central government and state government, to stop felling the indigenous trees in the Himalayas. Now, there is another connection between my first book and second book. In addition to the author, that's me, that I wrote first book and second book, but there is also a philosophical connection between the two books, and that connection is that many observers think that Chipko movement got their inspiration to hug these trees from Bishnoi community, the community that I covered in my first book. Because Bishnoi people also in early 18th century, they literally, Amrita Devi, one of the Bishnoi women, and more than 300 Bishnoi men, women, and children literally hugged their local khejdi tree. That is how they saved those trees in Rajasthan. So apparently Bishnoi people also utilize the same idea, same activistic style to literally hug the trees in the Himalayas, and that's how they saved their trees. But so Chipko movement happened in 1970s, and the trees were saved, but there were many other environmental issues in the Himalayan regions. And a local botany professor, Dr. Anil Joshi, who was teaching at a place called Kot Dwar near Haridwar. Haridwar is a very famous pilgrimage place on the banks of Ganges or Ganga. But Kotdwar is a nearby town, small town, where he used to teach there, Dr. Anil Joshi. And most likely with the inspiration of Chipko movement and Sundarlal Bahuguna and Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Dr. Joshi started taking his students in the remote areas of Himalayas to see what issues they are having, all these villages are having environmental issues. How do we start planting more trees? How do we stop the loss of soil? How do we stop more and more floods? So Dr. Anil Joshi, being a botanist, being a scientist in that region, he and his students started going to all these villages across their neighboring towns. And eventually they were so inspired that Dr. Joshi completely resigned from his government job. In India, to resign from a government job, it's like a tenured position forever, right? But Dr. Joshi was so inspired that he left his job and he started this new NGO called Hesco, Himalayan Environmental Studies and Conservation Organization, HESCO. And he and his students, they are still working with Dr. Joshi. And that is the story of, so my, that is the first community in my second book, is the story of this founding of this new NGO, what all they've been doing over the decades. So they started back in 1980s. Now almost 40, 50 years, they have been working on saving the local environmental issues, working for local environmental issues. So many issues, many projects they have taken. Government of India has also helped them, funded them. They keep giving them grants from Department of Science and Technology, from Bhabha Atomic Research Center in Mumbai, BARC. So they have combined many, even nuclear technologies to save the Himalayan environmental resources, farming issues, water issues, traditional farming they have revived, and then local produce, the fruits and vegetables that were growing in Himalayas were getting wasted because there was no proper way to connect the farmers with the markets. So Hesco became a bridge between the markets and the local farmers. So many things they had. They also worked for the local pilgrimage sites, such as the names that I mentioned, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, Yamunotri. How do we help the local farmers? How do we connect their produce with these large pilgrimage centers where millions of Hindus visit all these places they have been visiting these places, pilgrimage sites, temples for millennia. But local people were not getting the benefit of all these tourists and pilgrims that were coming from all over India. So how do we connect the local economies, local farmers with these pilgrimage centers? So all of these, many things they've been doing for decades. That is all I covered in my research. So it was very interesting, Jenny. So to coming back to your question, science and religion, because the founder is a scientist, he's still with us. He has just received a major award from Indian government, third highest civilian award he just received, Padma Bhushan. So he's very energetic still, and he's still working for the environment of the Himalayan region because he's a scientist, he's a botanist. So my topic became science and religion. But now, as I mentioned in my first book, that I prefer not to use the word religion in the Indian context, because religion has its own certain Western connotations, Abrahamic connotations, and so on. The native word that we have in India, which all Indian languages have, this word is dharma. So I trace the root of dharma. I try to connect dharma with science, not religion and science, but what could be different about dharma if we connect with science? Because we know that religion and science has a checkered history in the Western history, in the European context. Many discoverers and early scientists, Galileo and Copernicus, had to face a lot of resistance from religious leaders, such as Catholic Pope. They were not in very harmonious or friendly relationship when it came to science and religion relationships in the European context in the 14th, 15th centuries. But in the Indian context, we know that most of the discoveries that were made, discovery of zero, discovery of decimal point, astronomical discoveries such as the distance between sun and earth, and so on, they were all intertwined with the religious philosophical ideas. So dharma and science do not have that tense relationship that we see sometimes in science and religion in the European context. So that's how I developed this idea of dharma and science rather than religion and science. And that is what became the major part of this second book. And then, I'll stop here and I'll wait for your next question before I.
Yeah, and so coming to this point, and let's discuss some of the theoretical issues here, right? And you have mentioned some of it just now, but let's just dig deeper into this one. Last time when we talked about your first book, you mentioned about dharma and its usage and all, but then some listeners might be chipping in for the part two, right? Who might not have listened to the part one.
Right.
Can you just give a brief overview of what really dharma is and how you understand it?
Yeah, dharma is a Sanskrit word, but now is found in all major Indian languages, all contemporary Indian languages: Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Hindi, of course, Marathi, Gujarati, Bengali. All Indian languages have this word dharma. Dharma comes from Sanskrit root dhri, which means to sustain. So dharma inherently has this idea of sustenance and sustainability, because the root comes from to sustain. This is the idea that I really developed in my first book. So if dharma already has implicitly this notion of sustaining and sustainability, then why don't we develop this idea of dharma itself and see how, if if some communities are trying to practice their dharmic traditions, are they inherently sustainable? So that is what I explored in the first three communities in my first book, Swadhyay and Vishnois and Bhils. So for them, climate change or biodiversity or to work with to save the flora and fauna is not a special task. It is simply if they can simply practice their dharma according to the teachings and preachings that were given by their gurus and founders, they are by default they are living very sustainable lives. Is what I found in my research. So if they are trying to protect their sacred groves, if they're trying to develop new sacred groves, they're not doing these things to save their environmental resources. They're simply practicing their dharma. And whatever benefit that happens to the environment is simply a byproduct. So that is the idea of dharmic ecology, which is different from shallow ecology or deep ecology or utilitarian ecology. All of those notions are different from dharmic ecology. Dharmic ecology, the main motive is to practice dharma, to practice their cultural traditions, to live a life according to the teachings given by their founders, their gurus, and their charismatic leaders, such as Guru Jambeshwar or Swadhyay leader or so on. So similarly here, so that is the idea of dharma that connects with ecology pretty well. Now in the idea of dharma and science in the second book is also very interesting because the scientist, Dr. Anil Joshi, although he's a scientist, but he's also a very deeply dharmic person. So in his cottage, he has built a cottage in his Hesco campus on the outskirts of Dehradun, where he has a temple right beside his cottage. So he says that I want to do my research, I want to do my contemplation, I want to write more columns and books, but I also want to remain deeply spiritual. So he says, Chinta, Chitta, and Chaitanya, the three words that he uses. Chinta means concern for the environment, concern for the society, right? That's concern. Chintan means contemplation or meditation or to think really deeply and self-reflectively on those issues. Chinta could be concern. Chintan is very deeply philosophical speculations and self-reflexive thinking. So Chinta, Chintan. Then Chitta. Chitta is the crematorial ground. So he says that whoever dies in his circle will be cremated right there next to his office. Is cremated right there next to his office. So Chitta is the crematorial grounds or where people are cremated when they die. And then Chaitanya, which is a Hindu temple, small Hindu shrine to Lord Shiva. So all these C words he has kept very close to where he lives. So once again, Chinta, Chintan, Chitta, and Chaitanya. So spiritual rituals, crematorial rituals, self-reflection, and concern. All of those four things are intertwined in his life, in the way he develops his work for Hesco, in the way he writes his columns, in the way he cares for the community around where he lives, and the way he connects even the death with the regeneration. So whoever dies in his circles and is cremated in that next to his office, there they plant a new tree. So it's a recycling of the ashes of the dead person so that the cycle continues of this death and regeneration. That is the inherent idea in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain spirituality, Sikhism also. The idea of Punarjan, the idea of rebirth, that soul never dies. Yes, body dies and physical existence disappears, but the idea that soul always takes a different shape, a different life. So as people are cremated, from their ashes, that becomes fertilizer for a new tree, and the tree grows, and the memory of the dead person, diseased person, lives forever. So that is those are the ideas that they have tried to keep propagating in their communities. That's one of the ideas, that how dharma and science are intertwined in the life of Dr. Anil Joshi. And on and on, many more things I can keep talking about, but let me ask, let you wait for your question. Yeah. Yes.
I think you have beautifully put the idea of Dharma in your second book in relation to science, as you have explained just now. So let's move to the another concept which is like the word science itself. And I think the way science as a discipline and as a practice of how different people from different communities and different area of the world understand it might be a bit different. So how does how is science understood in the Indian context, or in the context the people that you were studying in? Yeah.
Right. So many scientific practices, what in the hindsight can be called as scientific practices, were actually part of the dharmic traditions, part of the cultural traditions for millennia in Indian villages. I'll give you some example of from Uttarakhand. So long before Benjamin Franklin discovered the electricity, right, when he was flying the kite, flying a kite, and then he suddenly felt a shock, electric shock, and that led to the discovery of electricity in America and so on. We know the story, the real incidents. But long before all this happened, in Uttarakhand, rural women were using electricity. They were harnessing the power of water energy. Those water energy they had because they are in Himalayas, in the mountains. There are many waterfalls, some large waterfalls, small waterfalls. So they were harnessing the energy of water to run turbines. So they built small turbines that were connected with this energy of water that was coming from waterfalls. As waterfalls would forcefully fall onto these turbines, with these turbines they were generating electricity, and that power was being used to grind the wheat, and that was generating flour. So wheat flour that was used to cook their chapatis and rotis for their vegetarian food. That wheat flour was coming from turbines that were connected with waterfalls for millennia, long before Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. So that's a beautiful example, I think, of scientific practices intertwined with cultural practices. That's just one example I give you. Another example I'll give you: farming is a very, India is called as a farming society, farming country. The majority of people are still based on farming based, profession, farming based practices that they're doing in their villages. So now Indian way of farming, or traditional way of farming across the world, not just in India, but traditionally how farming is done, especially in India, is this: that it is never about monoculture. No farm in India traditionally would have only one crop. It's always diversity of crops. They will have some lentils, some fruits, some vegetables. And because of the diversity within a small farm, the crop would sustain itself. It's kind of a symbiotic connection between different species of plants, different species of fruits and vegetables that would sustain each other. Now, this is a traditional practice that farmers were using for millennia. Only recently, science has also discovered that monoculture is a bane for soil, is a bane for farming. Monoculture is now being discarded by many speakers such as Vandana Shiva and many people that have gone against GMO-based farming, monoculture-based farming that is being pushed by big corporations such as Monsanto and others. Only now, so with Green Revolution, what happened in Punjab, for example, monoculture was pushed, only wheat. For thousands of acres of land, only wheat was being grown. Now, if only wheat is growing at a huge, vast land, when one disease strikes at wheat, the entire crop is gone. Right? But if there is diversity in the farm, no one virus or no one single bacteria can devastate the entire farm because of the diversity of crops. So this diversity that we see in Indian human demographics was also the hallmark of Indian farming. So this is how Indian farmers were doing farming for thousands of years, until monoculture came and devastated the farms in the state of Punjab, which was in the times of Green Revolution in the 70s or so. It was called as the bread basket of India. But today, if you go to Punjab, the entire land is completely poisoned. And now there is a cancer train from Punjab to Rajasthan because thousands of people are sick of cancer because the soil is so polluted, so poisoned, that people, even if they are getting groundwater from soil, that even that water is completely contaminated. And because of those contaminations, the cancer has spread like anything in many, many villages of Punjab. So that is what has happened because of the Green Revolution in the Punjab. Thankfully, that Green Revolution largely was limited only to the Punjab, but many, many other states, especially such as Uttarakhand, still are doing this traditional way of farming. And with Hesco's efforts, these traditional methods of farming are greatly revived. So they worked with local scientists, and Dr. Joshi himself being a botanist, they came up with different species of wheat and other crops that could help regenerate the soil in the Himalayan regions. So that's another way of combining traditional cultural practices with modern scientific practices. Again, Dr. Joshi being a scientist himself. So that is how he revived the traditional farming practices in Uttarakhand. And again, many, many more things I can keep talking, but I'll wait for the next question.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's quite well explained in that sense of how the idea of science has been understood in the Indian context. Now, you have also mentioned about the dichotomy between science and religion, where in the Western world there's this dichotomy, and then there's always a tension between science and religion. But in Indian context, the situation is a bit different. So. How is it? How is the situation different in terms of trying to understand science and religion in the Indian context, and how is it different from the Western context as such? Yeah.
Yeah, so like I was explaining already, I gave some examples, right? That farming practices, the idea of combining spirituality and with scientific thinking that happens around where he lives, right? And I will give you one more example. So in India, water is a huge deal. So now what they did, Hesco people, what they have done is they've taken help from nuclear scientists to connect the local, the water that is at the lower altitudes, to connect that water at the lower altitudes with the source of water that is at the higher altitude. So how do we connect the higher altitude source with the local bodies? So they compare the nuclear isotopes of water at these two places, at higher altitudes and lower altitudes. So this is again a great example of using latest scientific research, latest nuclear-based, radioactivity-based latest scientific tools to connect with traditional water sources. Because again, modern science, so-called modern science, came up with big dams, right? Wherever there are big dams now in India, Bhakra Nangal Dam and Hirakund Dam and Nagarjuna Sagar Dam and many, many more huge, large dams that were all thrust upon India with the modern science, right? But now we know that even in the US, such large dams are being decommissioned because people have realized that large dams could be extremely dangerous. If an earthquake strikes at a large dam, the whole local population will be devastated. Right? It will be a huge flood. So all these large dams are now being decommissioned in in the countries such as US. But what was the native traditional scientific technology? The local technology was to create small dams, small check dams, not large, huge dams that could be really disaster for large populations, especially if an earthquake strikes at them. So traditional way of stopping the water or saving the water was small check dams. Now to revive that traditional technology, Hesco connected with the nuclear scientific technology, latest technology of nuclear science, of radioactive science that they got from Bhabha Atomic Research Center right here in Mumbai. So they got the technology, helped the local farmers, local population in Himalayan villages, and now they are able to save these water sources instead of going for large, huge dams, which are which can only bring big disaster to a country, to a place such as Uttarakhand, because Uttarakhand is at high altitude, and if the Teri Dam, for example, if that breaks apart, God forbid, because of some kind of an earthquake, the danger is that the entire population, 300 million people of Uttar Pradesh, could be completely flooded, could be completely washed off. So that is why the need of the hour is to reject the so-called modern science and modern technology and connect people with traditional technologies that can help that can help the farmers in a better way, in a more sustainable way. So these are some of the examples that how traditional technologies, traditional scientific ideas work pretty well, much better than the so-called modern science or science that comes from the Western ideas of big dams or big industries or so on and so on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. Let's move into the aspect of your ethnographic research among the works done by Hesco, and I think it's now. I mean, you have been talking about Hesco and the
Right.
works that they do, but I think now it's a proper time to really dig into Hesco. Okay, what is this
Mhm.
really about, and what do they really do in that sense, and how did it started, and how is it going about and all. I think
Yeah.
that information will be really helpful. Yeah.
Right. So I already mentioned many of the projects that Hesco has done. Not one project that I have not yet mentioned is their work with women. So
Mm.
women in traditional villages across India, women are the main sort of pillar of the family that is doing everything in the family, because male members of the families, especially in Uttarakhand and Himalayan regions, they've all moved to cities. So what are left behind are the women in the families. So women collect fodder for their animals. Women collect the food for the children. Women do the farming also in Uttarakhand. So, and women also collect the produce that comes out of the farming. So because women were doing everything, so there was a need to organize women, to train women to take care of their produce better, because if they don't take care of the produce better, the produce was all getting wasted. So what Hesco did is to organize women, to train women, and to connect their produce, convert the produce, raw materials into such a way. So for example, if there are a lot of fruits that are being produced, that are being grown in Himalayan farms, so convert those fruits and vegetables into pickles, into jams, and into cans and bottles. Those bottles and cans can then be sold to cities. If you don't convert these fruits and vegetables into sellable cans and bottles, all the fruits and vegetables were getting wasted. So Hesco trained them to convert all these produce pretty quickly a, into a product that can preserve for months, that will not be wasted, and that can also bring some profits to the local farmers itself, without the middleman, without any intermediary. So that's one of the major ways Hesco reorganize, train these women. Other thing that I alluded in the beginning, I'll now say a few more things about that. So these Uttarakhand and largely, entire India really, a lot of pilgrimage places, a lot of temples. Right? So what they did is, so all the pilgrims that were visiting these temples, they were getting some sacred food from these temples as a blessing from different deities, different Hindu deities. So what Hesco did is, instead of giving them some pieces of sugar or sweet meat, as they're called, why not convert these produce that are being grown right there in Uttarakhand farms, convert those produce into some kind of a sweet or some kind of a candies or so on, that can be given to the pilgrims. So farmers are getting benefit from the pilgrims that are coming to these hundreds of Hindu temples across Uttarakhand. So that was another way to organize the local farmers, local women, local people with the local pilgrimage places, such as Vaishno Devi in Himachal Pradesh, in Jammu and Kashmir, and then also in Himachal Pradesh, they have done this work. Also, of course, in Uttarakhand. So almost all the entire Himalayan regions, they have spread their wings, and Hesco has trained local people in the thousands across Himalayas. So now, wherever Hesco people have reached out, there you can find some water turbine that is used to generate electricity, to grind their wheat into wheat flour. You will find them making all these pickles and jams to take care of their produce and get the profit directly. And many of these traditional farming ideas, saving water using nuclear isotopes technology that I alluded to in the beginning. All of these projects Hesco has led across Himalayan regions, that has really benefited local economy and local ecology across Himalayas. So ecology and economy need not be enemies. By taking care of ecology is better, ecological resources better, you can also take care of the local economies better. That is the idea that Hesco has worked for decades and decades. That is what has helped local people tremendously. So that is what I found. So when I traveled across Himalayan Uttarakhand villages and districts, I met all these many farmers, many of the local people, local women. And so that is how I learned, and that is what became my ethnography in the book, in the second book. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the works that Hesco does is very interesting in that sense of combining science and environmental concern
Mhm.
and economy in that sense. And the whole concern, the major concern is all about helping people, and not only helping people to grow, to sustain, but also to look after the environment. So I think this is something which is very commendable in itself. The work, the project itself is very commendable. Now, coming to the last aspect of the book and the project itself is about the river Kali
Yes.
Bin. And I think I hear arguments about Hindu rituals being polluting the rivers and all of those things. But I think this is another scenario of
Mhm.
where the certain river that you have talked about has been clean and become better because of a certain view about the dharma and the science
Mhm.
itself. So I think this is an interesting aspect of how the dharma and the scientific aspect could go hand in hand. So can you please elaborate on this one? Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, so this is actually connecting Sikhism with environment. So like I said in the beginning, Baba Sichewal is a Sikh guru. Now Sikhism itself is a new religion that started when Hinduism and Islam came together. Sikhism's founder Guru Nanak took some ideas from Hinduism, some ideas from Islam, and that became a new guru, the fifth youngest religion of the world, fifth largest and youngest religion of the world, as that's how they say Sikhism is. So Sikhism mostly is in Punjab, but also in Canada, especially in Vancouver area, in Canada, in England, in UK. So all of these regions in the US also. So Sikhs are known for their hard work, and you can see across India, wherever Sikhs are, they're always working hard, wherever, whatever profession they choose. So Baba Sichiwal was very disappointed when he saw that Kali Bain, the river that must be most sacred for Sikhs, because their founder Guru Nanak attained his enlightenment in the inside that river. So when Guru Nanak was alive about 500 years from now, there were a lot of tension between Hindus and Muslims. So disappointed with this tension, he took a samadhi. He took a meditation. He started doing meditation inside the river. And as he came out of the meditation, he said, "There is no Hindu, there is no Islam, there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. There is only one ultimate truth, that is the Omkar." So, based on that idea of Ek Omkar, the divinity is one, final transcendental truth is one. Based on that idea, he founded a new religion which became later on Sikhism. Sikhism literally simply means Sikh means disciple or a spiritual student. So all the people of this new wisdom are called as Sikhs. So they have 10 gurus, and Guru Nanak was the first guru founder. He was the founder. So the guru, where he found his enlightenment, his truth, how can that river remain so polluted and so dirty? That was the concern that Baba Sichiwal had. So he could not stop himself, and he literally jumped inside that river and started cleaning the river by his own hands, Baba Sichiwal. And eventually, of course, as people saw, when a guru is doing this kind of a cleanup act, many of his followers also literally jumped into the river, and they started cleaning all the weed out of the river. And today, when I went to the village Sultanpur, Baba Sichewal himself invited me to sit with him, and he himself rowed me into a boat, and he showed me how the river is extremely clean now, and absolutely clean, and the entire region is very clean. They plant a lot of plants, a lot of trees are planted around across the region. That region, wherever Baba Sichewal is and his followers are, that region is extremely clean and green, and that is the story that I weave into my as my second community in this book, in the second book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the story about the river and all
Right.
the works done by Hesco is something which is very really interesting. And coming to another aspect of it is where the people, the community see a connection between themselves and the environment. I work on animism, and in animism
Mhm.
there is a certain sense of connection between the humans and the nature around them, and nature around them. And I think this is an idea which people might say that it's a very archaic idea, of our forefathers and all. But then I think this is an idea which has becoming prominent nowadays through scientific studies and through the development in research work and all. That the sense that you have a connection with the environment, and that every aspect of the reality is related in that sense, is becoming more and more prominent, right, through research works and all of those aspects. So you also, in your concluding aspect of your work, you have also talked about this relational aspect to the environment itself. And I think I believe this is something which can really contribute to the scientific aspect of our research, but also at the same time concern for the environment, and as you talk about the economy and all of those aspects. So do you have anything to further add on this aspect?
Yeah, one more thing I will add. A few years back in New Zealand, some of the indigenous people made sure that river is accorded the same rights as humans. So because river is now also accorded the same right, river could be saved from further destruction from polluting forces and industrial forces in New Zealand. And following New Zealand, and also following Hesco's efforts and Dr. Anil Joshi's columns and so on, in Uttarakhand, Ganga and Yamuna, the two rivers, are also given the same rights as humans have. So rivers are also treated like human beings in Uttarakhand because of the efforts by Dr. Anil Joshi and other environmental leaders in Uttarakhand. Other major effort that Dr. Anil Joshi has led is what he calls as gross natural product or gross environmental product, not just GDP, not just gross domestic product. He says that every year, every country must also count its forests, its lakes, its ponds, its mountains, because those are also part of the national wealth in a way. If we are not counting those real wealth of the nation, and if we are only counting what we produce in industries or what we produce in farms, we are not really counting our resources properly. So he says GDP should be replaced with GNP, gross nature's product or gross environmental product. That would be the real study of a country's resources. That is another of his major efforts. And thanks to his efforts, Uttarakhand, his state government, has also accepted that idea. So Uttarakhand now counts for GNP or GEP, gross environmental product, not just gross domestic product. If all countries take that effort, that as the index of their progress, I think we can really keep an eye on all countries' real wealth, real forests and mountains and lakes and water bodies and so on. Those are not counted properly, and those are currently they are being siloed away in totally different department. And the governments focus only on the economic progress or GDP. But that's a very skewed way of measuring a country's progress, because we are ignoring the real wealth. So that's another one of the major initiatives by Dr. Anil Joshi at Hesco, and many, many more. He does so many other things. But for more information, I invite the audience and viewers to take a look at my book, or just go to the website of Hesco, hesco.in, and Google for his efforts. Dr. Anil Joshi and many, many other environmental leaders across India and across the world, they are trying their best to save whatever is left in our surroundings. So we should be thankful for their efforts.
Yeah, and I think the idea of GEP is really interesting, that needs to be taken into account. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the project itself, the Hesco project. So now we have come to an end of the second podcast, the last podcast that we have had. Dr. Pankaj, any project that you are currently working on, or you're looking forward to work on, any new things development? And also at the same time, if anyone wants to know more, contact you or know more about your work, and how can people reach out to you? Yeah.
Oh, Google is the best way. You can Google for my name, Pankaj Jain, Flame University, and you can easily find pankaj.jain@flame.edu.in is my email address. And I'm working on a couple of articles on climate change and portrayal of nature and the environment in some of the Indian classic films by Satyajit Ray and Mrinal Sen, Ritik Ghatak. All these maestros have wonderfully weaved in these portrayal of different ideas around the environment in their films. So that article I'm working on. Other article I'm working on is different Hindi films, even mainstream films, how they have shown climate change. I'm just one of my next edited volume is in press. My co-edited Encyclopedia of Hinduism is also in press as we speak. So yeah, all these projects are going on, and it's always better to keep working on next projects rather than
Yeah, and I think very interesting project ahead, and I'll be really interested to know more about your work and to also, I mean, get access to them and read them. And I wish you best in the future projects ahead of you.
Thank you. You
And
too.
also, yeah, and book itself, I mean, it is something which talks about cutting across disciplines of science and
Mhm.
religion,
Yes.
dharma, environment, economy, and all of those aspects. And I think this is where the listeners should chip in and try to not only read the book but also at the same time go ahead forward in trying to develop a sustainable way of living, especially in the Indian context where there are many works to be done, and
Mhm.
people are coming forward and doing a lot of works. And Dr. Pankaj Jain has beautifully written about it in his two books. And I think this has been a really interesting conversation. And thank you so much,
Thank you
Dr.
for
Pankaj.
inviting.
And
Thank you
take
for doing
care.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All the best.